Krásný den. My vás vítáme u dalšího rozhovoru. Já jsem Rypsi Mišáková, jsem terapeutka a průvodkyně rodinnými konstelacemi.
A já jsem Kristýna Strolená, jsem též terapeutka, laktační poradkyně a dula.
A my jsme si dneska pozvali hosta, velmi vzácného hosta. Máme tady Appletona, který se věnuje kraniosakrální terapii. Hello, Matthew. We are very glad and happy that you make this interview with us. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
Could you please tell us what you do?
So my main activities these days are teaching a form of therapy, working with parents and babies, called integrative baby therapy. And I also work with adults with their birth experience and their prenatal experience in workshops and in private practice as a psychotherapist. And I also practice craniosacral therapy as well.
What is craniosacral therapy?
Oh, that is a big question.
And if you can keep it short and maybe with to tell us what do you feel during the craniosacral therapy?
Well, I mean, I would say, first of all, that craniosacral therapy is not my main way of working anymore. Because my main focus is on the integrative baby therapy, but it's very influenced by the cranial work, and I still do some. But essentially, it's a form of body work, which is working with very subtle rhythms running through the body. And when we can get these rhythms into some kind of coherence, it often takes people into states of deep relaxation and healing. And the healing comes from the inside rather than the outside. And this capacity to heal from the inside is one of the guiding principles that leads all aspects of my work, whether as a psychotherapist, craniosacral therapist, or as a baby therapist.
So what's the difference between craniosacral therapy and integrative baby therapy? What's the main topic of it?
Well, perhaps the best way to explain that is how I got into doing the baby therapy, because I was working primarily as a craniosacral therapist with babies. And I was also supervising people. At that time, I ran a cranial school. And I was seeing that the babies were showing me things, some of which I didn't understand. They were telling a story. Some I did understand, some aspects I didn't understand. And also as a supervisor, I was having people coming along who were getting quite freaked out because babies were sometimes expressing some very strong emotions, often a lot of anger, crying, and they felt that there was something wrong, that actually the baby should just relax and everything be okay. But that's not how it works. And I learned about a pre- and perinatal psychologist working in Switzerland at that time. He was an American therapist called Terry. And I was kind of curious and did more training with him, and that opened up a whole world really for me. Of a whole, I was able to work with babies in a completely different way, and work with babies in the adults in a completely different way. And essentially, it's about really giving space for their story, recognizing that there's very specific body language associated with different stages of the birth, and we describe 4 stages from the baby's perspective, very different from the 3 obstetrical stages. And also there's very specific baby body language, what we call baby body language, associated with prenatal experience too. And by bringing the empathic resonance with the baby's emotional expressions, mirroring back some of this body language, I found I could work far more deeply than I could purely with the craniosacral therapy. And it gave me a much clearer idea about what the babies were expressing. Again, what stages of their prenatal birth experience they came, that they were showing in any one particular session.
And can you just work with a baby without working with mom or parents?
No, it's when we call it integrative baby therapy, it's in a way it's a body-based family therapy, but people come usually with the baby because there's some issue. It may be that the baby is crying and they can't soothe the baby. It may be a feeding issue, sleeping issue. There may be many different things that parents come with, but we do absolutely work with the baby as part of the family system. So it may be in a session that actually the mom needs a lot of attention. It may be that the father needs a lot of attention, but primarily people come because there's an issue with the baby, and then from there we work with the whole family system.
Yeah, I understood from your what you was telling during your stay in Czech Republic. I saw the video from your how to say přednáška.
Let's say interview.
Yeah.
When talk
where you described the phases of the birth, and
Yep.
if I understood it correctly, I feel like it's very similar to Grove's matrices, but you look very interesting at from my point of view on the last one stage of birth, the fourth one. Can you tell us more about it?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I want to really be clear that these stages were not my invention. They were developed by people who came before me from the osteopathic tradition and psychotherapeutic tradition, specifically Franklin Sills, who's an English craniosacral therapist, and William Emerson, who is an American psychotherapist. And in terms of differentiating them from Groff stages, I mean, Groff includes the prenatal period. We separate out the stages of birth from the prenatal period. And so these 4 stages are perhaps paying more attention to how the baby's cranium in particular and body move through the maternal pelvis. So they're absolutely compatible. We just focus on things slightly differently. And so the first stage is connected with the engaging with the pelvic inlet of the pelvis. That's descending into the pelvis. Then we talk about the mid pelvis, where the baby rotates, and the human baby is the only mammal that rotates. It's quite an interesting phase of the birth process, as they all are. And then we have the third stage, which is the baby coming under the pubic arch. And then the 4th stage involves the baby's head and body being born. And from our perspective, the 4th stage begins with the birth of the head and body and ends at the stage when the family as a whole begin to settle free of any medical interventions or any medical management, if that's not a word I like, but it's one that's used. And that's a very important phase from our perspective, that 4th stage. I mean, as they all are, but it's our first experience of arriving in this new world. And the way that we're welcomed into the world, the way that we encounter the world, profoundly impacts how we see the world from then on and how we feel about ourselves. So, for example, we may encounter many different medical interventions in that time. Some may be necessary, many are not. But we're often objectified. We're treated like an object, not like a human being. And every bit of research over the last 20, 30 years just shows how sensitive and aware newborns are. And yet they're not treated that way. So we're objectified from the very beginning. That's dehumanizing. And one of my passions is that birth needs to be humanized. It needs to be humanized for parents, and it needs to be humanized for the baby, because the baby is a human being having an experience. And we know that these experiences have lifelong consequences. we see it in the babies, we see it in the children, and we see it in the adults when these traumas get re-stimulated later on. So we talk about birth imprints, and each of these stages has its own specific somatic, psychological, emotional, existential imprints. And this particular stage 4, and as I say, it's very much about, is the world a place where I feel welcomed? Can I trust I'm going to be met in the world in the way which is congruent with my own sense of self? And our sense of self can be profoundly diminished if we're objectified. And if someone treats us like an object, what does that tell us about ourselves? And many of us in modern cultures have what I would call an inherent low self-esteem, or inherent sense of wrongness or badness. And much of that comes from these very early experiences. And yet, from a cultural perspective, the world of the newborn, the world of the baby in the womb is still very much in the shadow. It's purely seen in biological terms. Again, not as a human being having experience, and experiences which have lifelong consequences. And I see this again in my treatment room again and again and again. And just the last thing I want to say about that is I'm not doing this work because I began with that understanding. I'm doing this work because my experiences as a therapist led me to see how important these early experiences are. And really, my work is to advocate for the baby. I advocate for the parents as well, but also to advocate for the baby. The baby has a voice, and the baby's voice needs to be heard.
Many babies and many women, at least here in the Czech Republic, experience a traumatic birth. Can you please tell us, explain from point of view and your experience, what's going on in the body and with the emotions of women and the baby?
Well, one of the things I've learned from working with babies is the birth is intended to be a struggle. Nature has we could say intends birth to be a struggle, but it's a struggle in which babies actually can meet difficulty, meet obstacles, and in the best circumstances, overcome them. And in those circumstances, we develop resilience. So that was an important discovery for me. And I really saw that by working with babies, how they wanted in the therapy room to go back to those places where they got stuck, where they overwhelmed. It was something in them really wanted to go back there so they could complete a process. And I saw these babies kind of really embody and ignite, and they would look at me, or they'd look at the class, and with this kind of sense of, look what I've just done. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see that. But if we're going to talk about birth as it is in our modern cultures, we're talking about something which doesn't really work with baby or mum or indeed father. I want to include fathers in this as well. It doesn't work with the humanness and it doesn't work with our physiology. It's medicalized and it's objectified. I've worked with so many moms who feel so guilty because they were overwhelmed themselves in the birth. They felt powerless, and then later blame themselves. And I have to say, I get very angry about that, because I think it's not right. It's not right. And one of the things we know from the physiology of birth, which is so exact, it's so it's so well tuned, that if we work with it, and if moms and babies can work together in the birth, and one thing I would say is birth is a relational process. It's relational between mom and baby, but it's also relational between mom and the people who are supporting her. And so I think there are a number of different factors which make birth more difficult in our cultures. One is it's somehow seen as something to be afraid of. I think very early on I see a lot of fear around birth, which is culturally created. It's not to say that there aren't risks, and we need to be responsive to those, and we need to be responsible in terms of looking after those. But nevertheless, it's like the degree of fear that has come in around birth actually affects mom's physiology. So it's like the hormones, particularly, for example, oxytocin, sometimes called the love hormone, which gets released in labor, as do natural endorphins, pain-killing endorphins. These cannot get released in the appropriate way if there's a lot of stress around. So what we see is a lot of stress being brought to the birth process by the medicalization of birth. And I do want to say, for some moms, this being actually giving birth in hospital does feel supportive for them. And so certainly from my perspective, I don't feel I'm here to judge any way that anybody wants to give birth. Nevertheless, these environments often bring in a lot of stress, a lot of interventions which interrupt the relational process, interrupt the hormonal flow, and actually begin to inhibit the birth process. So one of the things we know is that stress hormones inhibit oxytocin. They inhibit the endorphins, which means that often the birth slows down. And I do want to say on my team, I've got a lot of midwives as well who they work with the birth side. I work with the therapy side, and they report the same thing, that the stress from the outside it inhibits the birth, slows the birth down. Maybe the birth stops, and of course then there are interventions. Now, speaking from the baby's perspective as well, these interventions are shocking. They're overwhelming. Babies have an inherent expectation of what birth is going to be like. They actually start practicing before labor, and are actively involved in the process. So it's like there is this inherent knowing, but not for these interventions. And so these interventions often one intervention is another intervention, and we call it the intervention cascade. And so babies get overwhelmed, moms get overwhelmed, and this shock that they carry from that, it stays in their physiology. Moms, babies, often fathers, and that also inhibits bonding in many ways, or disturbs bonding. So we start to see this kind of cascade of events which overwhelm the natural relational processes and create all sorts of difficulties, which we then begin to work with therapeutically. Now, that's not saying, just for me, it's an important point to make. It's not to say that interventions in themselves are bad. There are times when they're needed. There are times when they save lives, but they are used so routinely these days, and these create problems. And again, they're lifelong problems. We see it in the treatment room.
Yeah, as a doula, I usually meet women during pregnancy, before they giving birth, of course, and what they often share is the time during pregnancy. They are stressed all the time because they all the time go to some kind of counseling if everything is all right. So they are constantly in stress if there is some problem. So I need to control everything. I need to control what I eat. I need to control if the baby is all right. I need to control my weight and my pressure, blood pressure, and so on.
And what you do and don't do in your usual life, daily life.
Yeah, so when they come to me, they're like, they are really full of these things. And I can feel it on their muscles, because of course, if they are in stress constantly, their muscles are like in inflation, they are in contractions. So
sometimes like stones, you know, you're full of this fear.
Yeah, and of course also their warmth. So we are trying to relax it so they can be relaxed also during the birth, of course.
So it's something that I also see in the therapy room as well, very much. So as you say, from the very beginning, there's fear. You should be afraid. Something's going to go wrong. You get these kind of messages again and again. It creates, as you say, tension in the muscles. It also affects our autonomic nervous systems. So we start to get flooded with adrenaline. These are stress hormones get released. Now, also, we know that these stress hormones go to the baby. And so the baby feels the stress as well. Now, one of the things we see is that can actually begin to disturb the baby's trust in the process.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think we have to think about when we look at birth is it doesn't happen out of context. There's a before and an after. And what happens before affects both mom and baby. Now, one of the things I've learned really from doing the work is, first of all, moms go when with beginning of the pregnancy, sometimes even just before the pregnancy as well, moms start to go into a different state of consciousness, much more instinctive, much more internal. And then they're having to function in this culture is constantly pulling them externally, not only filling with them with fear, but hey, come on, keep working, keep doing this, keep doing that. Now that's, you know, many indigenous cultures would say this is crazy. And I would say it's crazy. You know, moms need to be supported. We need to respect, we need to respect pregnancy and birth. And we also know that from the very beginning, if moms start to communicate with babies, they begin to speak to the babies. You know, and I think really from the heart, that actually that aids bonding, and it also aids it aids trust in the relationship. It aids trust. It's like we're working together, and that actually is very helpful for the birth as well. And if there are disturbances, it's also very helpful to pull out of those disturbances if there's been a good period of prenatal bonding as well. But mothers need to be supported in this as well. And one of the things I think which is so wrong is mothers often get the blame. But actually we as a culture to think what's important here, and what can be more important than creating healthy beginnings for our children.
I think what's going on here, the point of view is that the most important thing is that the baby is, and the mother, of course, that they are healthy.
They will survive.
Yeah, and they
somehow
survive. But nobody cares how was it before the birth. And actually, we had an interview with Czech neuroscientist Ivan Rektor, and new researches show that the stress mother is feeling during the pregnancy it affects the brain development. So we are, you know, our brain is not working that well as it should be, and work, and then we can have depressions and anxieties as we are adults, or really we don't need to be adults, but in a puberty, in today kids, they have these all kinds of problems, mental illnesses, I would say.
Yeah, well, now I will be stressed that I am too much in stress.
Because Christina is pregnant now. So,
well, but you mentioned something about the birth process. It's like the journey with its progress, with its story. So the child must go through the hard parts, the hard times also, and it's stronger. It will get him some strength and resilience. And so what happened, just for instance, if this process is somehow
affected from outside,
or if there is no time to integrate this kind of like natural trauma, right? I can imagine as a doula, I try to use something we call self-adherence after birth. So the baby can crawl on the mother's belly and can breast from its mother, his or her mother. But there is the part when it is him or she or her who does it, who
is active.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Long day.
I think we mentioned many things, and maybe you can you have something to say to it.
So first of all, I would like to say I've got stacks of research here about the effects of prenatal stress. It's not something that is not well researched. The effects of prenatal stress on babies, the unborn baby. And of course, I think it's so important we don't create any new stress by putting the stress on mothers. They shouldn't be stressed. But if we begin, one thing I would say is that if we can pull out the stress, if it's not chronic, it's okay. Babies can manage that. If it's chronic stress, then we need to try and get support in that. Mums need to try to get support, and hopefully there would be support. But we don't want to create another stress, like it's not okay to be stressed. Of course, stress is part of everyday life. And again, a lot of that can be softened by talking to the baby. It's like, I know I'm feeling quite stressed now. It's not about you, to really just keep that connection from the beginning. So one of the things I don't want to come out of any of this work is more stress for mums. There's enough stress for mums. It's more about getting support for mums and support for babies. It's like we can have layers of support there, which we need to build in and we need to bring awareness to. That's the first thing I would want to say. Now, the other thing about the birth process is that if we define trauma as an experience which we have not been able to integrate in some way, because it's overwhelming. Now, that may be in a natural birth as well. It can happen in natural birth, or it may be because, and certainly there are more layers of it when we get a very medicalized birth, lots of interventions. But trauma is part of life. Trauma is natural. But, and this is the thing, we don't need to be traumatized. You can experience a trauma, but you don't need to be traumatized, which is to say the trauma doesn't need to stay in you. Now, there may be many different ways of working with this. The way we work within the integrative baby therapy is, first of all, we work with the parents just to come into relationships, so we can really see, okay, what do we want to do here? Then we hold a space for the baby and we begin to connect with the baby. Very often I'll begin to connect with the baby and say something to the baby like, okay, what have you got to show us? Now, babies can feel it if you're listening to them. This is something, babies will respond to you in a different way if you're listening to them and you're really there wanting to listen to them rather than objectifying them. Now, then very often what happens is they will begin to touch a certain place in their body and express an emotion. Now, I'm going to give you one example of that, which is this. Babies may do something like this. Now, this is a very specific baby body language connected with the rotational stage of birth.
Mm.
So one of the things we do then is we get the parents interested. Maybe your baby has a story to tell here. And of course, there's health. There's health in the baby. The baby's trying to tell a story. There's something in the baby's psyche which is expressing itself through emotional expression. Maybe crying, maybe looking angry or sad or fearful, and it's making these movements. So we begin to mirror back the emotional expression, try to get the right tone, and then mirror back the body language. Now, very often what happens is babies are suddenly like, okay, wow, somebody's getting this. And again, it comes from inside the baby. I don't take the baby through any type of process that I think the baby should do. I work with what's coming from within the baby. And so very often then what happens, the baby will deepen into their birth story. And there may be various different ways we support that, but we keep the parents curious so the parents can come into an empathic resonance with the baby too. Now, very often what happens is the birth story gets louder initially. Now, if you think about it, as a human being, if you're stressed by something, normally you want to share the story with somebody. You know, if you've had a stressful day, you go home, you start to, you want to share it with somebody. Now, if that person just tells you, oh, it's okay, don't worry, you're not going to really feel heard. If somebody says, shh, 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 it's okay, you're not going to feel heard. If somebody says, well, maybe you're hungry, have a biscuit, you're not going to feel heard. Now, this is often what happens for babies, which creates a kind of a disturbance in the relationship. Now, when we come into emotional resonance, the baby feels heard. If the parents can be on board with that, they often are amazed. I was working with somebody in Hungary the other day, just a week ago, and the mom was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can see my baby is really actually expressing a story. She really got it. But the problem is that in the same way that if we share a story as adults, we often begin to feel it more because somebody's listening to us. It's the same for the babies. So if they're crying, for example, often the crying gets louder, but it reaches what we call the release apex. And then the baby can let go of it. It's like, boom. The baby really softens. The baby relaxes. The breathing changes. The muscle tone changes. The baby body language often either diminishes or disappears because the baby doesn't need to keep telling the story. And afterwards, we see this again and again. The baby's more relaxed. They're more in contact. Moms often say, my baby feels heavier now, because the baby's really relaxed. And sleep gets better, often feeding disturbances resolve. I'm simplifying something which can be more complex than that, but is a general pattern that we see. So we really work with the birth story, and there may be different layers of it. There may be prenatal aspects to the story as well, but we always work with what the baby presents, not what we think we should do. And there's a profound intelligence in the baby, a profound intelligence which really wants to integrate these experiences. And then the baby is not traumatized. They've encountered the trauma, but they're not traumatized. So even in the worst birth, it's not the end of the story. We can still work to heal that. But we have to work with that intelligence in the baby, and we have to be open to it. As adults, as parents, and as therapists, to be able to engage with the baby at that level. So that's rather a long answer to your question.
But it's perfect. I think that it's important to emphasize that if it was a traumatic birth, it doesn't mean that this is the end, and this will be the same for the whole life, and that there are methods and techniques when we can help ourselves as mothers and the babies as well. I would say.
Yeah, you know, can I respond to that? There's a few things that I just want to catch. I mean, one is we work with the same things with adults, and the baby body language appears in therapy later on. The same baby body language is universal, and these profound feelings come up, and even then we can see a lot of healing No, and I work with adults 40, 50, 60 years old, and they're still, they can still do a lot of healing once we actually begin to recognize there is a birth story or prenatal story, and we can engage with that in a therapeutic way. But if we can do that at the very beginning of life, then this means babies and children can grow into much freer internal states. And it can take them in a completely different direction in life, which is much more connected with their true inner being, who they're really meant to be. It also, because the parents can understand the story, it helps the parents to be able to feel more engaged, because parents often feel helpless. I mean, very often what happens is when people come into my therapy room, I have, the parents are cycling in helplessness. They feel like they're terrible parents. The baby's cycling in the birth story or a prenatal story, crying, and everybody's alone. Everybody's alone in that. When we begin to open up story, everyone begins to connect. And something profoundly changes where everyone can relax into a different state of connection and resonance rather than aloneness and this disturbance in relationship. Now, an important part of that is also listening to the mothers and fathers. And very often what I see is mothers and fathers, they may have been very connected in the pregnancy leading up to the birth. And then there's this profound event, which often seems to spiral out of control. And then suddenly here they are with this crying baby they're trying to manage. And they've not had a chance either to talk about how they've been impacted. So they're carrying their trauma. And so actually listening and giving them a space for mother's emotions and father's emotions also changes this kind of what we call the relational field. And the other aspect about that I want to say is that babies also pick up on the parents' trauma. Babies are very sensitive to the parents' trauma. I often describe the parents being like an extended nervous system to the baby, because it's like babies rely on the parents to feel safe for them to feel safe. So if the parents are still in some kind of trauma, it's signaling to the baby, hey, it's not safe. So the parents can't relax, the baby can't relax. So again, that's why in my work, it's very important to integrate the whole family system. And it's very beautiful if you open up that space, how the whole session, it's like a dance, but something comes up with the father, something comes up with the mother, and it shifts to the baby, and then it maybe shifts back to the mom. And we just follow what emerges, and it's profoundly intelligent.
Yeah, that's something what we can see very often when, for example, the mother just start to tell us about how she felt during the birth, or how she feels now in relationships and with the baby or something. And after hour or 2 hours, she came home, and then she called us, wow, my baby is so calm down. And so am I, and
my husband sees it.
Slept all night. Everything's fine. And it was just talking, for example. Yeah, then we can use some kind of therapies or other techniques. Well, what do you usually use? What kind of techniques or methods you use in practice with babies or with all families?
Well, one of the things we are very clear about in this work is we work with principles, and we talk about them as living principles. So we don't work with protocols or anything like that. We work very much with principles, and certainly one of my fears about this type of work is I would never want it to become a mechanical protocol. But of course, it requires us as therapists to actually go into a session saying, I don't know what needs to happen. I'm here to support, but I don't know what needs to happen. Let's find out together. And so one of the principles we work with is exactly what you've talked about, deep listening. We call it deep listening. It's a non-judgmental listening to everybody, mother, father, baby, seeing what begins to emerge. And often the stories start to take shape and they start to really, we would say, clarify. We start to see the main themes. So that's one of the principles. We build the relationship with the parents. Everything is permission-based and we're listening. So I never do anything without permission of the parents or indeed permission of the child, which of course is non-verbal from the child. And another principle we work with is what we call potential space. We hold a space for the story to emerge. And there may be a lot of story there. So we look for what we call the primary theme or the primary presenter. What's the primary theme that needs to emerge in this session that may be different in a different session? And then one of the principles is to mirror the baby's experience. And we may do that, as I said, through mirroring body language, or maybe the emotional expression, like, oh, I could see you look so sad, or I could see you look really angry now, or you look really scared now. I can see that. And if you can begin to resonate with that, it's a very embodied relational way of working. If you can feel it, and certainly people who do our work, they've had to work with their own prenatal and birth experience, so they know it in their bodies. So we do the mirroring in that way, and there may be specific techniques we use. For example, what we call facilitated movement, which is to support the baby to move through a place in the birth where they got stuck. We talk about inviting curiosity from the parents, so the parents can get curious about the story from the baby. We have ways of working with the parents' tolerance thresholds, because it can be very overwhelming for parents when the baby is really expressing. I can't go into all the techniques we have for those, but they're very much about embodiment. They're very much related to helping the parents be present and to be able to regulate their own their own autonomic nervous system, so that they can come into, we talk about co-regulation with the baby. We sometimes use what's called doll reflection. We have a doll and a model pelvis where we begin to explore with the parents. So maybe this is what your baby's showing. And again, if the parents can begin to see there's a story, it actually changes the understanding from there's something wrong with my baby, and I must be doing something wrong, to wow, my baby's amazing. They're telling a story. It's hard to be with, but wow, isn't that incredible? And so through those type of processes, and I have to keep it quite simple here because it's, there are many different things we'll use in different situations, including working with the breath with parents and helping parents to track their own stress responses. We work with these living principles with a real understanding that what we're doing is supporting something that wants to happen, a profound intelligence within the mom, the dad, and the baby, which if you hold that space, if you hold that non-judgmental listening, can often reveal itself. But one of the problems is we exist in a fix-it culture where the expert from the outside comes and fixes you. No, it's like what we're doing is almost like completely the opposite. It's like something inside you knows what to do. I'm here to help you discover that, help you to create a space where that can express itself. And for me, it keeps the work very alive. It's beautiful. it really opens up the heart. And yeah, I've been doing it a long time and I'm not bored.
Great. I would say the main topic is the support, because you talk about it a lot, and usually women, they experience with us the method of saturation, and either they go through their own birth and experience it in a new way, or they had a traumatic birth of their children, so they are coming to heal it. And in both these topics, we put the father there or their husband, and they are like, wow, he's here as well. I'm not alone. And usually what's going on inside is that women feels alone, a baby feels alone, and then we live this aloneness, and we have problems to ask somebody for support. And usually also the women are all, also the men, they don't know what to do during birth. You know, like, okay, she is pregnant, the doctors will say what to do, and I'm the man, I don't know what to do. And you know, he's kind of like left off the story. And usually when you said that they are coming and they are separated and they are caught in their own trauma, it's like healing to say, hey, you are not powerless, but you have this power, which women who gave birth at home with no medical interruptions, they say, wow, I feel this power inside of me, something that I cannot even describe, but it's there, and it is what the baby can feel also, the power. And yeah, they are not struggling there hey, I have a lot of traumas. No, I know who I am, and I know what I need in my life, and they go straight ahead.
And I would like to say that something like that also happens in hospitals too. Yeah, but the difference is one is when the woman feels like it was in her hands. The whole process was in her hands, and everyone informed her about what is going on and so on. Or the second option is that something happened to her or her baby.
They did it to them
and
without.
that's the difference between if I feel like I'm not totally not okay with this, or yeah, maybe I have some scar for something, but it was still maybe powerful moment.
Yeah.
Or powerful experience. Well, I think I'm in the stage of mind with my pregnancy when, as you mentioned, the intuition is going up, but the common sense is going down.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's correct. You know, that's the way it should be, and that's the way the culture should support. And of course it doesn't. And you know what you describe, these kind of dynamics of either feeling empowered or feeling disempowered, is something that I see in Britain, in Germany, in all the different countries I teach in different ways. And so one of the ways that I come to this work, and I come to this work really, as I say, specifically with the baby in mind. And why I say that is because I think as a man, I don't feel I have the right to talk about birth from a baby's, from a mother's perspective. You know, I don't feel I have that right, because, you know, I'm not going to give birth, never have given birth, but I've been a baby. Now through that process, of course, I come into this whole field you're talking about in a different way. And so I think, you know, that's one of the things I love about the work, that we can work with it in different ways. But of course, over the years, I've supported a lot of moms, I've supported a lot of dads, and I've heard a lot from mothers, and I've learned so much from mothers. I mean, for all my trainings, I've learned so much from mothers. I've learned so much from babies. and indeed from fathers as well. I am a father, but I've learned from other fathers as well. It's these exactly these same stories, I think, which operate for the whole family. You know, was I supported to feel powerful? Was I held in relationship? Was I respected and honored? Or was I overpowered? Was I dishonored? Was I dehumanized? And one of the things, unfortunately, I've come to realize is that modern obstetrics is, and this is, I'm going to make a strong statement, but I think it needs to be made. Modern obstetrics is, it involves a lot of institutionalized trauma. And so the trauma is already in the field, which is why there's so much fear there. So actually, you know, it's like the hospitals very often are not the best places to give birth. Or if they are, the question is, are they mother friendly? Are they baby friendly? Or is this kind of arrogant, I'm going to take control of this situation, I know best? I mean, we have to profoundly respect human beings have been giving birth for, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. It's like you know, if birth was such a terrible thing, we would have died out a long time ago, you know. Now, and again, it's not to say that there aren't issues that need help, but I think we need to start honoring, respecting what's happening here for moms, for babies, and indeed father. You know, fathers' brain structures change during pregnancy. Mothers' brain structures change during pregnancy. You know, there is so much that we need to pay attention to and honor these changes, because they naturally attune us to what needs to happen. Now, one of the things I see is the minute a mum becomes pregnant, everybody's an expert telling her what to do. It's not even just the obstetricians, you know, it's the grandparents, it's the friends. Everybody comes an expert telling her, this is what you need to do and this is what you need to be scared of. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like, what we need to do is create support listening. What do you need? How can I help you? You know, it would be so different. It could be so different.
I think we agree. And I think we are coming to the last question.
Okay.
Why should I treat the trauma of my baby or myself, my trauma? Why is it important, and what it does to me or to my body, to my nervous system?
So trauma takes us essentially into two different states. One is what we call the fight and flight response. So if we are in the fight and flight response, we will often respond to situations as if they were dangerous when they're not. So if that trauma stays in our body, we may find these traumas suddenly taking us over, and we find ourselves getting really angry about something, or needing to get away from something. I mean, just a very simple example is somebody who got very stuck in their birth. They get stuck in the traffic in the city, and suddenly they're going crazy. It's like they're, you know, really mad, and it can often be because this place in them where they got stuck in the birth, they'll even sometimes touch the same places where they got stuck, is getting activated. So it's like our birth traumas run us, and it's not helpful when something runs us from early in our life. The other thing that can happen is we go into a freeze response, a dissociated, helpless, collapsed response. This isn't good for us either, because we can't focus, we get spacey, and we often see these birth themes get stimulated in transitions. And they'll also show up in our relationships as well. It's we project unresolved traumas onto other people. So we're essentially always going into either fight or flight responses or dissociative responses. We see this all the time. And so these also are not good in terms of our bodies, because they use a lot of energy. Stress hormones actually don't help us to relax and be able to repair literally our at the cellular level, and to get true deep relaxation. So on many different levels, unresolved traumas keep running us through life, and they often get reinforced later on. So for example, a child at school who, this is just a very simple example, who got manipulated in the birth in some way by an obstetrician, maybe with forceps or vacuum or a cesarean section. That's experienced as an overwhelming authority from the outside. And later on, for example, at school, a teacher may say, come on, you need to do this now. Boom, the child's suddenly either in fight or flight or going spacey. And it's seen as some kind of either a medical issue like ADHD, or the child's being lazy, or the child's just being, got behavioral problem, whatever. Actually, it's very often unresolved trauma. If we can begin to work with these, we can actually begin to relate to the present moment in a more appropriate way. These traumas don't run us. We can relate to each other in a much more appropriate way. And actually life would be a lot easier.
Yeah, I would emphasize that there are similarities between the PTSD and the trauma, and usually from these early moments of our life.
Absolutely.
I would say I wanted
ADHD.
to say ADHD and the PTSD.
So often we give labels to trauma behaviors because actually trauma is still poorly understood outside of certain circles, and we need to break down these specialities and start to speak to each other. And in my opinion, a lot of people who've got very academic qualifications actually need to get down off, we say in English, we say off their high horse. They need to come down and start talking to people and listening to people instead of thinking that they have all the answers. And certainly I think obstetricians need to really begin to understand about birth trauma, and educators, many people, we need to well, like you say, spread the word.
Matthew, thank you very much. It was a perfect interview, and this is one of those who I want to talk more and more and ask and share. Really interesting information.
Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you, and I have to say I loved the Czech Republic, and I'm going to come back. It's it's a beautiful country, and I love the people, and I'm really glad to hear the work that you're doing. I think we all need it, whichever country we're in. So yeah, thank you.
And I would like to mention, maybe if I'm not wrong, that some of your books is going to be translated in Czech. Is that correct?
There's one book called Transitions to Wholeness, which is very much about what we've been talking about, which is in the process of being translated. So yes, it will be available at some stage.
Perfect. We are looking forward. And again, thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.